I'm Amy Gillette. I'm with the William Davidson Institute, and this is part of the WDI Speaker Series. The talk today is called Crossing Borders and Cuisines, a new flavor of sustainable tourism. And I am delighted to welcome our guest, Yigal Schleifer. He's the CEO and editor-in-chief of Culinary Backstreets. This talk was a long time in coming. Yigal was supposed to be here March 2020, and obviously that didn't happen. He was a great sport about coming back over 2.5 years later. We finally got him here in Ann Arbor. So welcome, Yigal, and it's great to have you here in person. So a little bit about Culinary Backstreets, for those who don't know. They run food tours in 16 cities around the world in 13 countries. They also have a wonderfully rich food blog, which I've been subscribing to and reading for years, and I love and I highly recommend. Learn a ton about different cuisines and different cultures through the blog. And between 2002 and 2010, Yigal actually lived in Istanbul, where Culinary Backstreets got its start in the form of a blog called Istanbul Eats that covered the local Istanbul food scene. And from that, there was demand for some tours, so the blog grew into a tour business as well. And Yigal was there writing for the Christian Science Monitor as well as the German press agency. He's also been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of London, and several other publications. And Yigal and I actually we're on a common project together. The William Davidson Institute was a partner in a project called the Life Project, which supported food entrepreneurs in Turkey. They were refugee entrepreneurs as well as local Turkish entrepreneurs, and they worked together for 3 years to start food businesses in Turkey and really earn a livelihood. Yigal was on the board of that project, and WDI created the entrepreneurship curriculum for the Life Project. So that was our common ground, and I'll turn it over now to Yigal, and thank you so much again for coming.
Wonderful.
Yigal will speak for about 40 minutes. People on Zoom will use the Q&A to ask questions, please, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for the questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amy. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'm Yigal Schleifer, as Amy mentioned. I'm the co-founder and editor of Culinary Backstreets. Thank you so much to Amy, the William Davidson Institute, the Ross School, for having me here. Honored to be here, and just want to make sure that we're all good? Excellent. Great. So I wanted to start, as Amy mentioned, are we?
You have to put the mouse on the screen once because you've just started sharing screen, so you have to make it recognize the presentation again.
Are we all good? No? Sorry, technical. There we go. Thank you. So Culinary Backstreets is the global guide to local eats. We cover the local and neighborhood food scene in about 16 different gastro capitals around the globe. We got our start, as Amy mentioned, in Istanbul. And in North America right now, we work in 3 places, in Los Angeles, in New Orleans, and also in Queens, New York. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Culinary Backstreets. Amy mentioned a bit, I want to tell you a bit more, but first, I just want to kind of go through today's menu. And first of all, apologies ahead of time, I'll make a lot of sort of food type references. It's just the way, and puns, and it's just the way my mind works. But today's menu. So I want to go in. What is culinary tourism? I want to sort of give a little bit of a sense of how we look at it, how Culinary Backstreets understands culinary tourism, how and why is it growing. I want to give you a sense of this, what is now, more than an emerging sector of tourism. What is sustainable tourism? How is it evolving? Want to give you a little bit of a sense of how we understand what sustainable tourism is, what it's turning into, or what we would like to see it turn into, and then sort of how can these two work together in the best interest of all stakeholders in the various places where we work, how we're trying to make these two work together. Just to say, the photo on the right here is a real menu from a place in Lisbon, a kind of restaurant called the Tasca. I don't know if anyone here has been to Lisbon, but Tascas are these sort of very quintessential Portuguese mostly lunch spots, neighborhood restaurants, very very kind of typical home cooking. They have these daily specials that rotate. So, having a QR code doesn't really work for this kind of place. But anyways, just to say, none of these are stock photos. These are all photos that we have. But just to give you a sense a little bit of the kind of I guess, analog quality of the kind of thing that we like to do. So I want to first back up and tell you a little bit more about Culinary Backstreets. And to start, I just have a short video that I think will give you a little taste. Chris, can you help me with running the video? There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
We celebrate the unsung heroes of the kitchen. Rich culture that is revealed in every bite. Traditions honed over generations, resulting in unparalleled culinary craftsmanship. We explore the world through food and the people that make it. These are the Culinary Backstreets.
Buenos días, bienvenidos.
Hoş geldiniz. Yine bekleriz.
Benvenuti ad Antica Facelleria di
Ecco
Paolo.
qua tante cetre che è venuto fuori da
Oh, che
fuori.
assagito.
We go deeper, working in the world's most intriguing culinary capitals to learn about the stories and issues at play in their streets and kitchens.
Tekrar bekle.
Arrivederci da Napoli!
So that, I hope, gave you just a little bit of a flavor of the kind of thing we do. And it's a little bit out of date because we're now in one more city than here. But I want to give you a little bit of sense of the background story before we dive into these bigger issues. And here's Istanbul, where it all began. I moved to Istanbul in 2002 to work as a reporter. In around 2009, Ansel Mullins, who's the co-founder of Culinary Backstreets, and another American who was living in Istanbul, we were having, quite fittingly, lunch, and we're lamenting the fact that we kept meeting people who had come to Istanbul and walked away or left the city feeling like they hadn't had a good food experience, they hadn't eaten well, which to us seems sort of mind-blowing to think that anyone could come to this incredible city and not eat well. And what we realized was that a lot of, let's say, the things that were being written about the city, especially travel articles, kind of kept talking about a lot of the same places, these sort of, not necessarily tourist traps, but places that didn't really go deep and deep into the neighborhoods of the city. We knew that this was, the city had incredible stories, that food was an amazing way to really learn about the city, to explore its neighborhoods. And so we decided to start this blog, and it was called Istanbul Eats. And we were just really exploring the city through food, really trying to kind of almost like kind of oral history in the sense of really getting the stories of the people working in these small family-run restaurants, little businesses. The idea was really to document the city and explain it through food. The blog started gaining a nice audience locally. We then, about a year later, wrote a guidebook, a food-based guidebook to Istanbul, which is now in its 9th edition. We just came out with a new updated edition. And then a colleague of ours who does food tours in Rome said, have you guys thought about doing food tours? And we kind of thought it would be interesting to translate the editorial work that we're doing into an on-the-ground experience, to sort of extend the narrative into some kind of food tour. So we started doing these tours, and then the idea came to us that we could do this elsewhere, and we're actually even approached by someone in another city who said, would you guys? I'd done your tour in Istanbul. Would you think about doing this in Barcelona? So then in 2012 we decided to change this. It was Istanbul Eats. We changed it to Culinary Backstreets. And expanded this model to other places, slowly growing year by year. And what we've developed over time is this kind of mix of doing things off the tourist map. The idea is to really help people sort of dive deep into the city, exploring the cities through lesser known neighborhoods, through food, telling the stories of these local food purveyors and the culinary institutions in these cities, and then also going beyond food, right? So the idea is then to use the editorial work that we do, but also these experiences that we have, the experiences that we lead people on, to tell stories and tackle subjects, right, from history to urban culture, geopolitics, religion. I mean, food is this incredible lens, or the culinary lens is one that really allows you to explore so many subjects. So that's what we've been able to develop, and we see ourselves as mission-based in the sense that we feel very strongly about the work that we do and the impact that it can have and the impact that we want it to have. So, our mission statement, it's maybe a mouthful, but it's what we really believe in: to introduce intellectually curious eaters and travelers to the world's most intriguing culinary destinations, celebrate their culinary traditions and those who uphold them. The guy in this photo who actually died in the last 2 years is a lamb chop chef in Athens, who is just an incredible character. But the kind of people that we really want people to meet, and the kind of people that change your experience as a traveler. So that's really the mission, and we do it in a few different ways. We have our journalism articles that we run from different cities. We have books. We have guidebooks for Barcelona, for Athens, for Istanbul. We have a new one coming out for Lisbon, an app. And then our small group experiences, which started off as day tours, and that's mostly what we still do, but we also do multi-day culinary experiences now. So these are 5 days or even longer food-oriented trips in the cities that we work in, and now we're also doing them sometimes a bit out of the cities. For example, in Spain, we're doing a culinary trip in Galicia in the northwestern region of Spain. And the idea with all of these, again, is to be something narrative-driven, to tell a story, to really kind of go deeper, but to help understand a local place through the food. To also promote, we kind of think of these people as unsung heroes. Sort of in the age of the celebrity chef, we're sort of interested in these, maybe the home cook or just the person working in the kitchen of this very traditional restaurant or this little family-run spot who makes incredible food, but doesn't somehow get all the glory and all the attention. But we really love the stories of these unsung heroes, people who kind of help carry on what may be endangered traditions or overlooked traditions. And then to kind of continue on in this talk, we really want to help to promote sustainable tourism and also promote cross-cultural communication, to really bring people in contact with others in a culture that they may not be totally familiar with. So let's move on then. What is culinary travel? How and why is it growing? And a few definitions, maybe. This one comes from the World Food Travel Association, which is a sort of newish trade organization that's working in this field. Food tourism is the act of traveling for a taste of place in order to get a sense of place. Something that we like to use is traveling by letting your stomach serve as your compass. And I think the idea here is that really, people here, and I imagine some people in this room probably do this, food is sort of what you travel for. Food or culinary experiences are what determine kind of your itinerary, and certainly that's how I do it, which is like, instead of saying, okay, we're going to go to this museum and that museum, and in between eat here or there, it's like, well, we're going to go to this place to eat, that place to eat, and in between there's that museum that sort of slots in, But that is really, food is becoming increasingly, a way to experience a place. Where is it happening? I mean, well, first let me give you some numbers, actually, because it's just, these are taken also from this World Food Travel Association, and they're estimating, I think, this annual growth, they're saying between 2022 and 2027, 17.4% in what they define as culinary travel. I think it's a very large market for sure. I can only give an example, from our own experience, which is more anecdotal, and I want to preface this earlier just to say I'm here as a practitioner, not as an academic or a researcher. So really a lot of what I'm giving is just, sort of field observations from the field. But we, for example, when we started working in Istanbul, it's hard to believe now, but then there was really nobody doing specifically food tourism. I mean, considering what an incredible culinary destination Istanbul is, it was somehow overlooked. It wasn't seen as, of course people are taken for lunch and dinner at places, but nobody really was thinking about food as something around which to organize a trip or a tour. And that's been the case in several of the other places where we worked at. I think now obviously it's changing because culinary tourism has grown so much, and we're certainly seeing it kind of booming everywhere in many ways, and a lot of countries as well are sort of discovering this idea of gastro-diplomacy, of using their cuisine and their culinary culture as a kind of soft diplomacy tool or as a marketing tool. So we're seeing that, countries Taiwan, Japan, Thailand, Peru are some interesting examples of countries that are really being very smart. But we're seeing that here in the U.S. as well. I got a invitation just before the pandemic, but from Winchester, Virginia, which was establishing itself as a culinary destination, or trying to. You have Zingerman's here in Ann Arbor, which has become this kind of mecca for foodies. So it's interesting. So it's definitely, it's very much changed, but we're really seeing it. We're seeing it growing and we're certainly seeing competitors emerging in many of the cities where we work, and where before, we were sort of the only ones really focusing exclusively on culinary travel. So it is growing. So, and the question is sort of why. These are just a few shots from different places we work, just to some eye candy, but Marseille in the corner there. These are shots from Athens in the two, and then in Lisbon. But sort of why, and one of the things that we really think about is sort of the idea of food helping you enter a culture, enter a sort of authentic local culture, perhaps in the easiest, most accessible way. And one of the things when we started doing this work, we sort of thought about this idea of sort of like, there's this kind of globalized sameness that's sort of taking over the world. And I often think of it, I in my mind was calling it Brooklyn Modern, and then I found there's this book called Global Brooklyn, Designing Food Experiences in World Cities. This is Global Brooklyn, a new transnational aesthetic regime of urban consumption. And it's sort of, in a lot of the cities around the world, you sort of find that everything kind of looks the same. You could land in Istanbul, and you could land in Brooklyn, and you could land in Copenhagen, and you could land in Tokyo, and the same cafe is there in many ways. If you don't start looking deeper. So I think a lot of people are looking for that authentic experience. I mean, I think, obviously for locals, it's nice to have a cafe that feels international and feels like you're in a, Brooklyn-style cafe. But if you're traveling, what you really want is that deep local experience. And food is, I think, in many ways, one of the easiest and sort of most satisfying ways to enter that local culture. So two photos here, just to say kind of in contrast to the Global Brooklyn style cafe. On the left is Mr. Jamal in Istanbul. He also sadly passed away a few years ago, but his cafe still goes on. He makes the most incredible Turkish coffee you'll ever have. Is the name of his cafe is Manda Batmaz, which means so thick a water buffalo could stand in it. And it really is true. He makes this incredibly thick, beautiful. His son now carries it on. He's on my tours. Then on the right is one of the workers at a coffee roaster in Lisbon called Flor de Selva. They are one of the last in Europe that uses wood for their roasting. They're also on a tour of ours. So just to say, as opposed to that sort of globalized, sort of very homogenous aesthetic, you enter one of these places and you're immediately drawn into a very local world of incredible tradition. And it's very easy. So why is culinary travel growing? I mean, a few ideas, this increasingly homogenized, globalized world, travelers are looking for a sense of authenticity. Food, culinary culture really offers that in a very immediate but can be profound way. People are interested in eating local. It's something that, everybody wants to eat local even back at home. So when they're traveling, they want the same thing. It's even harder when you're traveling to sort of find that local neighborhood spot. So turning to someone like us is a great way to do that. food culture is one of the best and easiest ways to have that local experience. And something I like to call the Bourdain effect, which I think started very much with his show, is that it really helped popularize this idea of kind of traveling for food and having these sort of deep local experiences. His show has spawned a whole bunch of other shows, like Tucci's show on CNN, other ones, but it really started with him, and I think it really did help push this idea of kind of traveling with local culinary culture in mind. So that's culinary travel. What is sustainable tourism? How's it evolving? And I'll tie these two together. But first, let's talk a little bit about sustainable tourism. Just because I want to tell you what this photo is. This is in Naples. On the left is our guide, Amadeo, and this is a bakery, a family-run, third generation. In the video, there was this group with an older man and younger guys, and they were kind of joking around in Italian. So that's their bakery. They make something called freselle, which is this twice or three times baked bread that's then used as a base for a kind of salad and in soups. It's one of the stops in our tour there. And it's the guy on the right is the son who now runs it. So maybe one way to sort of look at it is first look at what is unsustainable tourism, and a few sort of thoughts. Prioritizing an increase in tourist numbers. I mean, just kind of a basic focus on just increasing tourist numbers. Prioritizing short-term benefits without really thinking about their impact. A lack of diverse choices for visitors, so more or less kind of funneling everyone into the same thing. Local culture and traditions absent, really not taking into account those things. And then environmentally unsound, so large groups, buses, wasteful, all of that. So sustainable tourism, of course, can be just the opposite of all of this, but there can be something more. I mean, and that's something deeper, something that contributes more to the local economy and the health of the local culture. I mean, that's kind of how we're thinking. And for us, that might look like something that is called regenerative tourism, which is a concept that's sort of emerging now, kind of an evolution of sustainable tourism. It's a concept that has really sort of stuck in our minds as something that very much fits. There's an Australian organization called the Tourism Collab that works on developing regenerative tourism, and I'll just read to you how they define regenerative tourism, because I think it makes a lot of sense. But they say regenerative tourism, at its simplest, seeks to ensure travel and tourism that delivers a net positive benefit to people, places, and nature, and that it supports the long-term renewal and flourishing of our social ecological systems. There is a very kind of focus on the ecological in their framework. In a regenerative framework, conscious travelers, host communities, businesses, and governments care, connect, and contribute to the regeneration of local communities, places, and nature, the assets on which tourism is based. So, it's a system that sort of works on, at least the way we see it, and the way and I'm going to show you some examples of the way we work. But it's a system that works on really sort of not just kind of going into a community and taking people around, showing them around, but also really helping the community benefit from it. So for visitors, good experiences should be, as part of this, memorable, entertaining, collaborative, connection building, empowering. That's sort of the idea. But on the community side, the idea is for this to really contribute to the vibrancy of local communities, to generate, or at least not necessarily just, I mean, if not generating, but also supporting quality jobs, increasing economic participation, and then promoting higher levels of civic and community engagement, somehow really benefiting both the travelers, but also really benefiting the community. And in this photo, for example, this is Pasquale in Naples, and he is the last sign maker of Naples. So if anyone's been to Naples, has anyone been to Naples, Italy? No. So if you walk around Naples in the markets, you'll see these signs everywhere, and he's the one that draws them all. So as part of our tour, we go visit him, and he'll often, as part of it, make signs for people. We've also had his signs as we've been able to put them in. We have an online shop, and people have been able to order custom signs from him. So I mean, he's someone who is very much off the tourist track, but he's gained this kind of whole new audience through being part of our tour, and there's I think people have developed a real appreciation for his work, and then we've actually seen since then he's sort of. Part of it I think is because of working with us, but also just kind of a changing atmosphere in general in terms of what the city has to offer. But he's becoming kind of a bit more of a well-known character outside of the markets that he used to work in. So that's sort of a good example of the kind of the kind of element of what could be a regenerative or what is a regenerative type of activity. What are the elements of making the tours successful and sort of fitting into this model that's both sustainable but also offers all these elements of what were listed before. So obviously food is crucial. This is a supra in Georgia, near Tbilisi, kind of typical Georgian feast. So yes, food is obviously essential, has to start with that. But places are, of course, really important. The kind of places where you feel like you've kind of entered a different world. This is a restaurant in Lisbon that's right at the waterfront, and she's the grill master there. It's this wonderful fish restaurant that we take people to on one of our tours, and you really, it's kind of like a secret little spot that's off a road, and you kind of have to go under an overpass, and then you end up at this place. It's a very memorable place. She's a very memorable person, so that really stays with people. And gives you that sense of entering local culture. And then the people, of course. The working title of this talk was "Come for the food, stay for the people." And we sort of really find that with a lot of our trips is that people, of course, it's culinary travel. They've come for the food. But what they remember is the interactions they've had with the vendors. For example, the guy on the left here he sells stuffed mussels in Istanbul near the Grand Bazaar, a fish vendor in Lisbon. It's these human interactions. It's getting the stories of these people. It's seeing them at work. There's something very memorable and just raises the activity to a different level, both of being not just memorable, but also of connection, human connection, which then takes us to the next one, which is sort of imbuing the experiences with stories. And really at the heart of what we do is storytelling. The idea of really telling the story of a city through food, of its people, especially of its neighborhoods. And that's human infrastructure is sort of what I like to think of as what we're helping people understand. And a city, for example, and we're very focused on the urban setting for the most part for the work that we do. And the city, of course, has its traditional infrastructure of roads and bridges and subways and all that. But then there's a human infrastructure, which often gets overlooked and is, I think, as important in many ways. And the human infrastructure is sort of the places where people gather. So, for example, this photo here is in Barcelona, and it's what they call a bodega. And bodegas in Barcelona are actually these kind of, traditionally they've been places where you sell bulk wine. People come to buy bulk wine, then they started offering a little bit of food. Now they've turned into these kind of more proper wine bars with tapas and sometimes even more sophisticated food, but they still remain these neighborhood gathering spots. We do a tour in Barcelona, kind of bodega crawl, where we go from one bodega to another in one part of the city. But the idea is to really give a sense of how these act as neighborhood gathering spots and how they kind of are, in many ways, a kind of glue for neighborhood life. So human infrastructure is like bodegas like these are critical in Barcelona. They're critical in terms of serving as gathering places for families, even neighbors, and just for sort of the health of neighborhood life, which then in turn is critical for the health of city life. You know, having these sort of livable, walkable, just enjoyable neighborhoods, it makes such a difference in terms of the overall quality of life in a city. So, you know, we really want to bring in that sense of sort of what is the human infrastructure of the city, and how does food play a part in that? And food plays, you know, for example, here plays an incredible role in maintaining this this city's human infrastructure. So we want to bring that in. And I want to give you a few examples, specific kind of case studies, you could say, but these are actual tours that we do that I think really highlight and sort of represent a lot of all these principles that I've been talking about in practice. And this is, so going off the grid in Barcelona, when in Barcelona, has anyone been here? Anyone here been to Barcelona recently? Or very crowded, probably. You saw a lot of tourists there. They've had a real issue of over-tourism. It's a real problem there. I mean, to the point of creating resentment. Sometimes in some neighborhoods you'll see, you know, I don't know, tourists go home, graffiti. The municipality has stepped in to limit Airbnbs, to limit the number of hotels. And we saw that very much. We've been working in Barcelona for about almost 10 years now. And one of the walks that we did was in an area called Born, and then it would go into an area called Barceloneta. Two neighborhoods that increasingly started getting more popular and more popular, to the point where it was very difficult to offer the kind of experience that we like to offer in those areas, just because it was so touristy and crowded, and the businesses were feeling really, you know, under pressure, and then some businesses, you know, the rents are going up, so they couldn't stay. So we decided to go off the grid and develop a tour in a neighborhood called Sants. Sants is out of downtown. It's where the central train station of Barcelona is, and it's just a very local neighborhood. There's nothing really for tourists there in the classic sense of the word. I mean, there's nothing of very, you know, architectural significance, but what it has is like these very wonderful local neighborhood food places, you know, bodegas like this, the previous one. It has very interesting cultural life on a neighborhood level. There's former textile factories there that shut down, were empty for some time, and then local residents have turned them into cooperatively run social centers. We take guests to a cooperatively run brewery in one of them, just to taste some beer and have some food, but just kind of get a sense of how the neighborhood is functioning. There's a wonderful market there. You know, there's the famous Boqueria in Barcelona, which is just this total kind of, you know, crowded mess. And then there's this very nice local market with incredible food, and wonderful little businesses, and just a lot of great tradition that lives on. I was in Barcelona in March with my wife, and she has a colleague who lives in Barcelona, and we did this tour. And she spoke to her colleague, and she said, "Oh, I'm on a tour in Sants." And he said, "Why are you in Sants?" You know, and that's exactly the reaction we want, because we want locals. You know, if a local says, "Why would you go there?" It's perfect. You know, that's like exactly, because the idea is like it should be a revelation even for locals. But the idea is to really get people, you know, out now of the center into neighborhoods that are not getting the tourist part of the tourist pie, really. To involve the local community more. So to really sort of put into action some of those principles of engagement, local engagement, to lessen the burden on the center where all the tourism is happening. So we did something similar in Istanbul, and this is, you know, Istanbul is also a place that is very crowded these days, rightfully so. I should mention that the other day there was a terrorist attack or a bombing in Istanbul, which oftentimes people sort of think, oh, how's it going to impact tourism? But it's it's just an attack on the city, a place that we really love. It's very important for us. So we just kind of thinking about it, our hearts definitely go out. But working in Istanbul, we also were noticing there's places where these kind of overcrowding issues are happening. There's a lot of tourists. So how can we sort of put these principles into effect? So there we do a tour, our latest tour there. We have a few different routes that we do, but this one is in a neighborhood called Kurtuluş. Kurtuluş is just outside of the heart of Istanbul, the Taksim Square area. But again, a place that really no tourists go to because there's nothing there. There's no beautiful mosques. There's no old buildings. It's like a really local neighborhood. It has a very interesting history, though. It used to be predominantly Greek and Armenian. It still has, for Istanbul, where these communities are much diminished now, but it still has very strong Greek and Armenian communities in the neighborhood and some old institutions of these communities. It has very interesting food. Again, similar like the Sans neighborhood. It just has these very local, traditional. The kind of things are actually harder to find in some of the more touristy neighborhoods or some of the other neighborhoods of Istanbul, where a lot of these traditions have gone away. This, for example, is a breakfast that we take people to. So the neighborhood, we start off the tour taking people to an old Greek sports club. It's from the late 1800s. It's this place that feels almost frozen in time. It's still active. I wish I'd put a photo in there. I don't know if we can bring it in, maybe. Anyways, it's incredible. It's got a basketball gym with with this beautiful wooden ceiling. It's just this incredible experience. We do breakfast there, and it's a real kind of step back in time, but also a way to connect with the Greek heritage and history of the community. And then we take people to this place, which is actually run by people from Erzincan, which is a city in Turkey's east. So these are new migrants. So it's a new wave of migrants who've come to Istanbul. They've been in the neighborhood for a few decades now, and they make this. They have like a kind of tandoori. They call it a tandir. They make this bread, this wonderful breakfast spread. And the whole walk sort of takes you through this neighborhood where you really kind of get a sense of very local life. And again, there's really no tourist infrastructure there in the sense of the sort of typical things, but what there is very much this human infrastructure that I was talking about before, of sort of real community life. Old Istanbul communities that still live on. These new communities have developed their own traditions there, and it's again, it's something that we feel like it really gives us the chance to live up to a lot of these principles that we're trying to work with, which are engaging the local community, bringing new opportunities for parts of the city that don't normally get engaged in tourist activity, and and I think also we do small group. Our tours are small groups. I feel like working in these kinds of neighborhoods, they're, I don't know how to put it, but it's they're for people who kind of want a very different sort of experience. So I'm not so much concerned about these places being overrun with tourists, because it's not if you have a few days in Istanbul and you want to see all the sites, this is not what you're going to do, right? Because you're not going to see any of the sites. I mean, what you're going to see is like a very local neighborhood. You're going to have really very interesting food, really good food. But this is for someone who's looking for something a little more deeper, and it's not for everyone. But it's a very satisfying, wonderful experience. So I just wanted to give you a little video just to get a taste of a visit in the neighborhood.
Now this is Elif, the usta, the master. She said welcome. And she's from Erzincan, the eastern part of Turkey. They have this traditional bread, tandır ekmeği, we call it. They make it with some wood fire here. And She started to work with her grandparents when she was 10, and now she's 30, so she's the master. Okay, we call them usta. She became semi-skilled kalfa and then the usta. She prepares like 200 per day, so she wants me to do it too. So I'm going to try. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I am so excited. They are laughing. Okay, no problem. Be ready. That's closer. Allah. Of. Misafirlerimize. Buyurun efendim. Afiyet olsun. Nasıl? Buyurun efendim. Çok güzel.
Great. So I'll just go back. Yeah, so it's just a very, very local experience. This is in the same neighborhood, a different place, but also from people who came from the Erzincan area in eastern Turkey. One of these tendir ovens. They're baking these flatbreads, I think for them, having tourists previously it's just not even something I think that came into the equation for them because nobody was coming through. But I think what we're trying to do is really see if there's ways to expand the horizon of what tourism can look like, which neighborhoods it can go to, what experiences can be part of it, and to really meet people at a different place where it's not just about sort of the classic sites, the typical sites, but something deeper and more profound, and to ultimately give them this deeper sense of connection, to leave them with, like I said, these memorable interactions with people. The food is important, but again, it's the people, these connections with people, the kind of the cross-cultural communication, and to really have people go home with this really sense of having connected locally with the culture in a way that goes much deeper than a typical tourist experience. I'll stop here because I know there may be questions. I just want to say that for us, we're continuing. We slowly are going to continue to expand. We have ideas of different places that we might want to work in. I'm happy to talk about that. But for us, really, kind of the next frontier in terms of our work is trying to get a good sense or figure out a way to kind of how we can gauge our impact as an actor in the places where we work. Not, we have a good sense of how to measure that on the guest side because we do surveys and we get feedback, but it's the challenge is sort of what is our actual impact in the places where we work. I mean, we think we're doing a good job and we think we're doing good for the places that we bring people to and for the neighborhoods in general. Like we hope that there's a kind of halo effect, but what we would really love to do is find a way to really measure that and see if we're doing well, if not, how can we improve it? But really for us, that is, I think, kind of a very important next frontier. So I'll stop here. I'll take questions. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And happy to take questions.
Great. Yes, and I will be moderating the questions, starting with Paul here.
So Amy mentioned a project that you were working on with Amy at the beginning of it. Could you talk a little bit about that and the role of that in business development and
The Life Project.
The Life Project. So the Life Project was a project working with women food entrepreneurs in Turkey. I think the initial plan was to work with Syrian women. It was then expanded beyond that. I was on the advisory board working with the project on that. Culinary Backstreets itself wasn't officially involved beyond helping. We provided some connections in Turkey, and we also supported in other ways. We did some editorial work about the project, and then ended up actually some of the women who were part of the project, we ended up having them write articles for us, recipe articles, so we were able to give them some exposure that way. But we weren't officially involved beyond that.
But the idea of it was to use the culinary experience and the opportunities of bringing the culture and starting businesses based on it. Is that right?
Of that project. Yeah, I think the idea was that these women would, there was an incubator in Istanbul and then one in Mersin, which is a town in southern Turkey. The idea was that they would gain experience and then be able to launch their own businesses, culinary businesses, food businesses.
Yeah, and it had that gastro diplomacy piece that Yigal mentioned as well, where you had Turkish host community working alongside mostly Syrian refugees in the kitchens, and both of them in parallel starting food businesses. And we were providing the training, the equipment and the expertise, and a lot of the connections, some of which came from Yigal, to make them successful in those food businesses. There was also a cookbook that came out of it that I think Yigal was also consulting on, with recipes from the participants in the project. Yes.
When you move into a new city, how do you go about making those connections with the restaurateurs?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we really put a lot of our effort into is finding the right people to work with when we start working someplace, and really finding just that right person, just really somebody who's incredibly enthusiastic about the local food scene. They're not necessarily somebody working in the food industry or business. They could be a journalist, or they could be an academic, or they could even just be somebody who has no connection, but is just somebody who's out there really kind of just scouring the back streets looking, for good food. So the model that we've used is to start with an editorial project. So to really have this person that we start working with start writing about local places, and that from there, we kind of start developing a narrative. We kind of get a sense of, like, okay, what's the story here? And a lot of the places that we work in, or in all the places that we work in, they have, a great food culture, but we're looking for a place that also has a deeper story, a kind of an interesting, deeper story that the food helps to tell. So, a good example is Barcelona. We do a tour in a neighborhood called Gracia, which has this very strong sense of Catalan identity. So we use the food to sort of tell the story of Catalan identity and the Catalan issue and the conflict, and that all comes through the food. So the idea is very much to really start with that frequently. It hasn't worked like this every time, but really ideally to start working with this editorial project to really get a sense of what's the bigger narrative. And then, once we get a sense of what that narrative is, then we sort of, then we have a good sense of, like, well, what's a neighborhood that might be a place that really tells this story? And then once we kind of get a sense of, oh, this is an area that tells a story, okay, what might be some kind of places along the way that really fit into this narrative? So that's ideally how it works, but yeah. Yes.
For a city that you're not in, and by the way, this is exactly the way I love to travel, so I love what you're about, and everything from meeting the local people to getting off the beaten track to finding a really authentic food experience. If you're traveling to a city that you folks aren't in, what's your advice on how we find places like that? Because it isn't easy to find them.
I know.
Any resources we all know about?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm kind of obsessive about this kind of thing. So I don't know if you want to do what I do. But what's really interesting now is there are a lot more resources than there used to be. So I oftentimes, I just start kind of doing, some internet research, and it's hard for me to kind of quantify it. It's like certain things just smell right, when you sort of see, like, you come across somebody's blog and you're like, this kind of, something about this seems right, or nah, this looks like, but it's hard. And this is the kind of thing that we're really trying to, we're trying to help people with, is that take away that sort of, that stress of, like, how do I find that local place and those best little places? But, I think when traveling now, I personally just really cast a wide net, just try to ask a lot of people, and then a lot of it's just really trial and error, but it's hard, and I
find that once somebody's written about it, these days everybody's found it.
And then everyone's, I know, which is something that we see as part of our work as well, that certain places that, we had initially written about, and it was like a great little hidden gem. And then, and that's kind of, when I said that I had the Bourdain effect, there's a bit of that, that's like that as well, where a certain place, as featured in the Bourdain show, and then it's all over. Yeah, so.
It's no longer cool.
But I have to say, on the other hand, I was just in Istanbul 2 weeks ago, after not having been there for a couple of years, and Istanbul is maybe not the best example because it's so vast, but it was amazing to me that you could still, and I know the city very well, and we've written about it now for more than 10 years, and we've written tons of articles about all these little holes in the wall, and I was still, there's still holes in the wall to find. I went to this. Somebody had actually pitched us a story about this that she's working on, but it's this little spot in a neighborhood called Fatih, which is out of the center a little bit, but not too far. And it's run by a mom and her kids, and they're originally from a town in the southeast of Turkey called Kilis, where they make these they make a dough out of bulgur and then stuff it with ground meat, and they make it in all kinds of different, kind of these big dumplings. Anyways, just a wonderful little spot. And it's a relatively new spot. They opened up a couple of years ago. So it's like new places keep emerging, this feels like the kind of place that's kind of bound to become one of these classic spots, that people kind of would make a pilgrimage to. But also, there's enough neighborhoods that are off the path, and this is what we're trying to do with these other tours, where just to, there are places, if you really look and you really want to have that experience, then kind of heading out of the center and looking for these neighborhoods but it's hard. I mean,
it's the way to go. Yeah.
So.
We have a question from the Zoom.
Yes.
About if you provide workshop style tours where people might make a recipe or two along the way.
Yes, we absolutely do. We have something that we call Shop, Cook, Feast. That's kind of the concept. So for example, in Kurtuluş, in where we do that tour in Istanbul, we also do a cooking type activity there. So the teacher actually lives in the neighborhood, and she has a really nice cooking studio in her house. But you walk through the neighborhood, pick up some things, and get to see some of the shops where they make the kind of things you're going to learn how to cook, and just kind of get a general sense of the culinary culture. And then you go back and cook, and we do that. We do that in Mexico City as well. And then we do those as part of the multi-day trips that we do now. Those always feature a very, at least one or more than one hands-on workshops for cooking. So yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take this question from Yakuta, then we have another Zoom question, and then we may wrap up.
Thank you for that. I'm just curious to know, what are the challenges of running a business like this in 14 countries, and are your guides on your payroll? How do you attract customers? How do you fundraise? What are the challenges?
Yeah, sure. But actually, Amy and I were talking about that a little bit before. The biggest challenges are the things we can't control. Obviously, pandemics, bombings in cities. Being sort of in the tourism sector, and then having these external factors that you really can't control is a big challenge. One of the reasons why we kind of purposely expanded was we were very much heavily based in Istanbul, and then about 5 years ago there was a series of bombings here which really impacted the tourism industry. So we really realized kind of finding a way to kind of mitigate these kind of external factors. Now the pandemic, it was totally, everything was shut down. So that was a real challenge. I think we've been lucky in the sense that we seem to attract kindred spirits. I think because we're working with a defined sense of mission, and we're working with people who are very passionate about this particular subject and seem to share they are attracted to working with us because they share the approach that we have. I feel like we've been able to surmount the kind of the cross-cultural issues because in a certain way we all speak the same language, and it's not just English, but this kind of language of this deep love for culinary culture. So that's been a big help. It's interesting. I mean, we've been very lucky in the sense of despite working in all these different places, we've been doing this now. The business really started as a remote working business. Soon after we started, I moved to Washington, D.C. My co-founder and partner was in Istanbul. Now he's in Lisbon. And the model really right from the beginning was remote, which is interesting. So for us, really, the kind of this evolution to remote working has not, that's kind of what we've always been doing. So we've actually been able to find a way of making it work, and then we've been doing that this way for 10 years now. So I'd say really the biggest challenges are these kind of the factors that are beyond our control.
We'll take a final question from the Zoom room. This is a great question to end on. Someone who's obviously, their interest has been piqued and they want to know how to get involved with you and your team. So what's the best way to follow up with you?
They can just go to our site and there's a contact us. It's easy. Yeah, they should just. But yeah, I mean, we're always, we've had some very serendipitous outreach contacts made just kind of out of the blue. You were asking me earlier how we sort of choose the different cities that we work in, and I was saying that it's sometimes someone has approached us with a very compelling pitch. That was the case with Marseille, which is where we work in France, and somebody there kind of approached us and say, hey, you guys should really work here, and here's why, and here's what I can do, and we were sold, and it's worked out really well for us there. So, but yeah, we're always happy to hear from people with interesting ideas from interesting places.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Yigal. This was wonderful.
Right.
Thank you so much
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our Zoom audience. We will sign off from them now.